So, Scream was a success.
Hello? Yes?
Wait, not that one. Well, yes, that one was a success too, but we're talking about this Scream. Scream 2022, which grossed over $140 million worldwide at the box office, a number that, counting inflation, is a bit of a far cry from the grossing power of the original movies, and still isn't even overly impressive compared to the underperformance of Scream Forum that was released back in 2011. I guess the difference there is that Scream 4 cost almost twice as much to make, and I don't think had as much of a cultural impact as Scream 5 did, but now we're just splitting hairs. I would argue that the new movie had a much smarter marketing team that took advantage of the current social media fads to really help boost awareness for this movie to the general public and build excitement for the hardcore fan base. But despite all of that hype, I would be lying if I tried to claim that Scream 5 was anything more than just a watered down version of Scream 4. Except I feel like this film had a bit of a more forced, overarching generational perspective that doesn't feel completely earned, even by the own movie's logic. Seriously, the basis for this film's final party scene is built around an admittedly clever tribute to the late Wes Craven, despite the motivation for the killer not completely justifying that specific situation, given the assertion that the last Stab movie failed to adapt the events of Scream 4 in the overall canon. In short, Scream 5 was, at least in my opinion, a lazy retread of various ideas that were better explored in previous entries. And at least in my opinion, was a movie that introduced a series of new characters that I have no real interest in exploring in new sequels.
Hi, Gen Z, how are you?
Anyway, with all of that being said, here is my general pitch for Scream 6 that we already know is currently in development. We start the movie at the beginning of a Comic-Con-like panel where Jason Blum, or maybe an actor playing a rough approximation of him, kind of like they did with Lance Hendrickson essentially playing Wes Craven in Scream 3, coming out on stage and announcing Stab 9 to a very ecstatic crowd of horror fans. However, before they can get into any real detail, Jason Blum's character says that Stab 9 is going to be a bit of a retooling from the last entry, essentially acknowledging the mistakes of this franchise and saying that they're going to go back to basics. Specifically, after decades of original content, they're finally going back to the source material by adapting a book written by Gale Weathers based off of actual events that occurred in Woodsboro. And not only that, but they're bringing back all of the original cast members from the first few films, as well as other recognizable faces. From there, Jason Blum's character introduces the trailer for Stab 9, which acts as a mashup of events from Scream 4 and Scream 5 together, with fun and interesting cameos making up the characters that were introduced within those two films. Personally, I feel like it would be really fun to have Kristen Bell as Officer Hicks, but I don't really know who would be playing Kirby, Jill, Chad, Mindy, or the rest. If you want to throw all of your suggestions in the comment section, then yeah, I would really like to see what y'all come up with. Anyway, I do think that this trailer itself should be the highlight of the entire movie. Do it right, bring in everybody you possibly can, and make it so that it could be a marketing material aspect for Scream 6 as a whole.
Seriously, can you imagine this trailer being the premiere trailer for Scream 6? Talk about upping the meta game. Because, if I'm being honest, for an entire franchise that deals specifically with meta gags, in-universe references to a film series based off of the events of that film series, they've done shockingly little with the Stab franchise as it pertains to the story of each individual movie. I guess, besides the events of Scream 3, but that's a whole other video that we're going to have to make later down the line. Also, just a bit of a mini rant here. It's always annoyed me that the Scream franchise deals so much with the concept of horror movies and fandom within horror movies, but in terms of having almost anything at all to say about the business or even fandom of any specific horror movie franchise, especially something like Stab, none of the commentary has been specifically about horror movies since the first movie. Now think about it this way, Scream 3 made it seem like trilogy cappers were common in horror movie franchises. Scream 2022 had Rian Johnson, of all people, direct the 8th entry in a long-running franchise that subverted expectation and pissed off a bunch of fanboys.
I understood that reference.
I mean, in what reality is that for horror fans? If they wanted to be a little bit more on the nose, they should have had a washed-up comedian like Jeff Foxworthy come in and direct the 8th film, and making it completely new and original, kicking out all the lore and everything else, but existing in the same universe. You see, the problem with those examples, and many more if you really think about it, is that these are criticisms for the industry as a whole. The concept of franchise filmmaking, and not a direct critique on the horror community or the industry that creates these franchises. And yeah, it is somewhat obvious. The reason they do this is just to make Scream as palatable for every single person who wants to watch it, and not just horror fans. I'm just saying at this point that it's a little bit annoying to have an entire franchise whose specific purpose is to critique the horror movie industry and the fandom that inhabits that product that they make, that doesn't critique or have anything truly meaningful to say to any of that.
And honestly, that's the point of this entire movie. This is going to act as the first film that deals with the Stab franchise as an official backdrop to the story itself, and not just an interesting set piece, meta gag opening, or some backdrop to the continuing motivation of the new killer. Instead, this should be the first film in the franchise that pivots away from our main survivors and focuses on Ghostface itself. That's why when the trailer cuts to black and shows the title card, it doesn't say Stab 9, it reveals the title Ghostface. From there, we see the crowd go wild as the cast from the film comes out on stage. And we're talking about all of the main cast members: Tori Spelling, David Schwimmer, Luke Wilson, Kristen Bell, and all of these other people who are supposed to be in this story from this point onward. From there, we jump into the Q&A portion of this panel, where we see fans dressed up in series-related cosplay asking the creative team questions regarding the production of the new movie. For me, this scene would mostly act to essentially put all the explanation and exposition for what this story is going to be about at the very beginning, quick, solid, and somewhat entertaining for the audience. Because this scene would tell the audience that this movie is based off of a new book from Gale Weathers that aims to put Dewey's character in the starring role. We would also learn that the book, as well as the film, was given the green light by Sidney Prescott and marks the beginning of a whole new era in the franchise. One that does away with all the previous entries outside of the first 3 films. Eventually, as the Q&A goes on, a fan dressed in a Ghostface cosplay makes their way to the mic and begins to ask pressing questions to the cast and creative team regarding their understanding of the Stab series and the horror genre in general. It's this discourse that finally breaks the happy-go-lucky feeling that has been permeating throughout this entire opening, and finally gets us back to what we expect in an opening of a Scream movie, as the cosplayer begins to ask a series of harder to answer questions and pushes back anyone who tries to take the mic from him. It's here that we see the panel getting a little bit more uncomfortable with the situation as the scene crescendos into the cosplayer asking an angry, pointed question to Jason Blum before another Ghostface cosplayer jumps out from behind the panel and brutally murders him. It's here where everybody in the audience screams as we smash cut into the title screen, Screams. From there, I think we jump back in time and start at the beginning of the day of the con.
I'm not a huge fan, personally, of the whole 3 weeks earlier teaser thing. I feel like, we should start our stories where they begin, not start them where they get interested. Get out.
Look, I understand it might be a little bit of a cheap trick to have a movie open up halfway through the runtime, only to go back and start at the very beginning of the day and have the story play out from there. But I feel like this franchise could benefit by doing something different with the opening.
Well, I'm getting ready to watch a video.
Really? What?
Oh, just some scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
Because honestly, it's not like this franchise has been striving for originality for a while.
You love art and TV and movies.
Okay, well, lots of people love movies.
Yeah, but she says you love scary movies and that you guys have that in common.
And by a while, I mean a long while.
Hello?
Hello,
Yes?
who is this?
Who are you calling?
Who am I speaking to?
Wrong number.
Hello?
Hello?
Who's this?
Who's this?
For me, the last interesting cold open for this entire series was all the way back in Scream 2.
As I said, I think we jump back to the beginning of the day as we once again reintroduce all of our main characters and begin to set the stage for the eventual bloodbath that we are going to see at the end of this movie. The major benefit to this being that given the entertainment space and the sheer number of people in attendance, this would be an environment that constantly builds tension throughout the film, leaving the audience constantly guessing about where the killer might be at any given time. Which one of these Ghostface killers is the real thing? Or at least throughout the vast majority of the film, are we looking at a Ghostface killer at all? I mean, this is the best place ever to have a new character dressed up as something new, interesting, and possibly even more iconic than the original Ghostface killer. As I continue to say, this franchise needs new and interesting ways to reinterpret and reinvent itself now that we're 6 films in. Additionally, I feel like this story space would allow for a fun, if not a little chaotic space to see our core cast of characters fumbling around as they get ready for the big announcement panel later that day. You can have Gale running around trying to make sure everything is going according to plan as Tori Spelling, David Schwimmer, and Luke Wilson each play conflicting personalities towards their fan-driven interactions. One of the things I think would be really funny to explore is having David Schwimmer mustached up and attempting to flirt with Gale throughout the proceedings. It's an inside joke that wouldn't go anywhere because yeah.
Shut up!
Another character that we know that we're getting back for Scream 6 is going to be that of Kirby. And while I've heard a lot of people talking about how they want her character to be working on the new Stab film, that somehow after all the events of Scream Forum, she went out of her way to start working in film, which I guess makes sense given what we know.
Black Christmas, House of Wax, The Fog, Piranha. It's one of those, right?
But honestly, I feel like that would be a little too easy given what we've seen throughout this entire franchise. One of my biggest gripes with the Scream series is how it connects every single character to the world of film. Or at the very least, each and every single character has some kind of creative bent to them. For me, it would be a little bit more interesting to reintroduce Kirby as a dejected minor celebrity in the Scream universe, more akin to the millennial version of Sidney Prescott, who never received her proper recognition due to Gale's reluctance to write a book based off of the 4th film. So the trauma of those events led her down a dark path, maybe bringing itself to some kind of an addiction problem that going to a convention based around this horror franchise is only further exacerbated. But at the same time, it's clear that Kirby attended these events in order to earn whatever little she can to provide for herself and her addiction, because this is the first time her character has ever been acknowledged in the Stab universe. Another reason I think that this would be a really interesting direction for her character as a whole is because I would like to see the interaction that Kirby has against Gale as well as Sidney sometime later down the line in the trilogy. On one hand, we, the audience, have gotten a brutal look into how fame and notoriety has affected Sidney, Gale, and Dewey, all while they attempt to struggle to get past their trauma. But we've never seen the opposite side of that within this franchise. How does someone deal with the trauma outside of the fame and notoriety? Does it make it easier? And what would the level of resentment that Kirby would have towards Gale and Sidney be in that specific situation?
I don't know, I feel like this would be a much more interesting direction for Kirby's character, instead of her just being another aspiring creative talent that's being introduced or reintroduced to this franchise.
Finally, I guess we have to address the survivors of Scream 2022, and while I wouldn't mind seeing the return of Tara, Sam, Chad, and Mindy, I'm not exactly sure what to do with these characters. Probably because I didn't really like them all that much in the last film.
I would probably leave. Okay, I tried to be nice, get the fuck out.
At best, I feel like it would be appropriate for all of them to show up at the convention because obviously they're connected with the new Stab movie in some way, shape, or form. Perhaps Jason Blum's character is trying to organize a big marketing campaign that involves the film actors along with some of the real-life survivors. And obviously what we know about these characters from Scream 2022, Mindy should be dragging everybody through the convention, playing up the fangirl aspect, and really endearing herself to the audience while everybody else just would rather be doing something else. That's what I would love to see. Fight me in the comments.
Okay, that is the last time you are gonna pull that crap. You hear me?
Yes!
Do you hear me?
Oh yeah, so if it wasn't clear already, I do have a brief idea that I would really like to cover for Scream 7, but this video is already longer than it has any right being, and hey, if it does well, I'll cover that in a future video. So make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share it with your friends, do whatever you want with it, and we'll talk more about Scream in the future. Just, do the YouTube stuff.
Nevertheless, this isn't even the biggest departure I have from this overall series, as I would argue that given some of the real-world situations that have been going on with the new Scream film, as well as Neve Campbell's involvement in that, I feel like this would be the most appropriate place to simply not have Sidney Prescott in a Scream movie.
Okay, given some of the news that's been floating around recently, we're not entirely sure what's going on with Neve Campbell and the Scream franchise, whether she's coming back or not coming back. Maybe she's coming back in the 7th film. Who knows? Honestly, this is something I want to cover in another video, so I'll make it really brief here. Don't bring her back. What more does her character have to give to this franchise? She's been through enough. Give her a rest period. Again, like, comment, and subscribe. Do the YouTube stuff. If we get 100 likes, I will do the pitch for Scream 7. Just make it happen. Let's do this.
If she has to come back, then yeah, I would say give her a throwaway scene or two, set up the next film, and simply move on. This is not her story. So with the setting and character motivations that I've laid out being the driving force for this first half of the movie, we finally make it back to the events that started off this story, with the death of Jason Blum's character and an entire convention losing their freaking minds. From there, I think you essentially have to tell the story in real time as what appears to be a group of Ghostface killers tracking down and systematically killing everyone involved with the new Stab movie. This situation causes all of our characters to separate with the heat of the moment, boiling over the tension with the different pairings. The reason I think that this is a really good idea is that you can have all of the surviving characters from the first 5 films, as well as their actor counterparts, all interacting with each other to make some very compelling comedic as well as dramatic, intense moments throughout this part of the movie. And the kicker in all of this is that there is still the possibility that one, if not multiple, of our main characters are in fact helping the new Ghostface killers. But at the end of the day, I feel like breaking down the third act like this after the events of the public murder would be enough to justify a conclusion that breaks the traditional Scream format. Enough to let at least some of the killers escape justice and certain death, blending into the crowd and leaving the chaos behind, only to stab another day. For me, this is the only logical conclusion for the next Scream movie. This series has exhausted its goodwill in the whodunit genre, as the vast majority of the time, the reveal isn't specifically earned or that interesting. In fairness, I'd argue that Scream 4 was at the very least interesting, with the killer's motivation being that of fame and fortune. I mean, that's the specific reason I want to see Kirby come back, just to contrast her with Sidney Prescott. However, I would argue that there isn't a lot more you can really do with a series like this. As I alluded to before and was made very clear in the last Scream movie, Ghostface isn't really the main character here. It's always been some guy or girl in a mask. The motivation is always going to be, for lack of a better term, basic. That's why the third act of every Scream movie, besides the first and the fourth, in my opinion, derails the entire film's momentum and usually leaves a sour taste in my mouth. That's why I feel like it would be, at the very least, a little bit interesting if we skipped over all of that this time around and allowed for Ghostface to win for once. Death, destruction, and a new set of killers on the loose, teeing up the 7th entry that will attempt to wrap up a double-sized story started with this film. But that's just my take.
Anyway, guys, these are just a couple of my thoughts when it comes to Scream 6 coming out in 2023. Given everything that's been happening recently, everything that we're seeing from set and everything, none of this is going to be the story. It's just, I think it's a time for this story to do something completely different, new, and original. Have some stakes and bring in some familiar and not so familiar faces. Pull it all together and focus specifically on the Stab movie. Guys, like I keep saying, like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends. 100 likes, we'll talk about Scream 7 and the pitch that I have there. Some really interesting stuff, exciting stuff for the future. So I hope everyone enjoyed the video. It's been real.
This video is brought to you by Paramount Plus. Now that summer is over, you might want to sit back and...
Wait, what are you doing?
Doing a video promotion for Paramount Plus? It's like the 8th best streaming service.
We didn't get a promotion deal with Paramount for this video.
Oh, wait. You need to get a brand deal sponsorship in order to talk about this stuff for your channel, and they pay you for that?
Yes! Why would anyone do the promotion videos if not for that?
Because they genuinely like the product, and not because they have to double monetize a video with multiple ad breaks on top of their own crowdfunding sources, and not having this just be another way of leveraging their internet clout in an industry that they genuinely know is based around the hopeless metrics of an uncaring algorithm, and that their audiences aren't all that caring or interested in them as people, but as just content farm creation people in order to fill up 10, 15, or maybe even 20 minutes of their day-to-day lives. And at the end of the day, corporations and studios know all of this, and it's easier for them to pay a handful of content creators just a few extra dollars in order to build their brands for them instead of having to figure it out organically and actually earn the success of their products.
I thought this video was about Scream.
Oh yeah.
The KRW Network.